Take them to the nursery, set his bed.
Come on. You know what number is?
Are you taking her? Take that.
I'm not gonna play with toys. I'm not gonna play with toys. You guys gonna play with me?
Yeah.
I'm gonna play with toys. I'm gonna have lots of fun.
Andy, can you help me clean up this table, please?
Yeah.
There, just use the white down.
No.
You want to do it? Okay.
We're gonna go. We're gonna go explore.
I was reading an article the other day, and the article happened to be about foster kids, which I know nothing about having a foster child. The article was saying that it's a requirement, or maybe it said it should be a requirement, that a foster child should have their own bedroom. And I thought, I never in my life had my own bedroom until I moved out. Yeah, but there was no other bedroom there either.
Boys in one room and the girls in the other.
Rick was the only boy, so he got his own, but
I know for sure they have to have their own bed. I know that for sure.
their own bed, not necessarily their own bedroom.
I don't know about that for sure. Because whenever Brian and Amy had the foster girl Millie, they had to have bed, and then Butsy's also, we put in 2 beds for them, for those 2 boys.
I just think that's funny because.
It may vary state by state.
With families now, do your girls have their own rooms?
They've got no. They're all three going to be piled into one room. Yeah. I think it's better off to have them together. I don't think the own room is a good thing.
Especially when they're little.
Yeah, well, just
I don't even like.
maybe when they get older, maybe give them more space. But I think they need that socialization. And
Well, and I don't know anybody else, but my sister was 4 years younger than me, and she had nightmares. So she'd wake up. She almost never woke me up, but in the morning I'd wake up and she'd be like under my skin, just about. So I always knew that she had a nightmare.
yeah. But that foster thing may be a state by state regulation.
Oh, I didn't find that.
A lot of that is because of children.
I used to people that made the rules for nursing homes never worked in a nursing home, so.
Probably.
That's probably true.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's true on most stuff anymore.
Government stuff, yeah. I think
You're right.
the government steps in to make things
Better. Yeah.
never better.
They put people on that never did. Yeah. People that had problems.
Yeah.
I look at it and see how would things look, how should it be in a perfect world, and that's fine.
Yeah.
What we should have.
It's been hanging around here for a few days.
Well, I tell you.
Looks like it tapers around something round.
The way we treated the people in COVID, the last.
That one.
Biden said, yes, I thought that was the most, that was a cool patient. Got to the point of Charlie.
Oh, we got
They
cruise
would
it
have
up.
known that.
I had 80 pounds in my car.
Oh, okay. It's been the
Okay.
Took them to the family down there.
I guess I'm in your spot, Virgil. You want your spot?
That's all right. You sit right there and I'll sit down here. Charlie got that seat warm. I mean, Andy. Can't keep up with both of them.
Yeah. Just leave them there. Thank you. I get the whole
I'm
box
sure you
last
keep
time.
up with one of them.
Well, there's not too many left.
Oh, it's possible. Do you see anything?
Crackers.
No, it's all keep them look.
Is it all that one?
Oh, okay.
I think this has got it. It looks kind of like that style, but it looks like they're all there. Unless it's
Oh, is that what's missing? Is one of those?
that's
things?
down there.
The ring.
Yeah, it's down there.
Last call on the block.
They're actually still missing.
Come this way before anybody says anything. Yes, you got it.
There's one to be sure.
Because we'll want it next week, maybe.
We know if it's start time to go try and do this week.
I don't think so.
I don't start till they're all in here, and we don't have anybody coming in extra, so kind of casual today. There you go.
Bubbles. I done something there.
Yeah, still missing one.
It's working too. I tell you the other ones if you want to. They're probably those.
Down.
That look that. I guess that leg can't kick out.
No.
Which would be best to have the one that's missing. Oh, here we go.
Two of them, he's about ready to fall down, huh?
Got this last one here that you'll be good as new. Yeah, no, have to wait. Have to wait till you dismount to get that one. Did you take the chimney out? Did you rip around it?
We took it out.
I think that's for the best. I know it's a little extra work probably, but anything sticking through the roof is liability.
Good, I'm glad I'm not the only one. Oh, dear.
Get started, huh?
I think there's something you don't like.
Well, here's the good news, people. We're going to have entertainment throughout Bible study. So, yeah. Going to go back and forth, back and forth. That's fine. All right, we're in John chapter 15. John chapter 15. We left off at verse 12 last time, so that's what we're going to start with here. All right, so just a 15-second review because we haven't met in a couple of weeks. This is Jesus' final teaching to his disciples before he goes to the cross. So this is right before his arrest. This is after the Last Supper, so this is just a short period of time where he has to teach his disciples. The book of John has a lot of this unique information. The other Gospels don't. And pretty much from chapter 13 to chapter 17 is more or less Jesus either talking with the disciples, teaching them, or praying. So if you have your Bible that's red letter, you'll notice most of it's in red letters. So that's what this part's all about. So with that in mind, we're going to continue what Jesus has to say, starting in verse 12. So would somebody read John chapter 15, just verse 12, please?
This is my commandment, that you love one another just as I have loved you.
Okay. Thank you, Virgil. So he calls it a commandment. Why would we need to be commanded to love each other? Why is that? Because we're human. What else?
John 15.
John 15, verse 12. That's where we are. Plain John. Zero John.
Okay,
Okay.
I got it.
All right. So again, why else? Just throw out some ideas. Why else? Why would we need to be commanded to love each other? Why wouldn't it always
Make
just
sure
come
it's
natural?
done.
Make sure it's done. That's true. Yeah. What else? Why isn't it always natural to love somebody?
Some people are too lovable.
That's the obvious answer. Yep, love that. Yep. Very true. Some people are hard to love. Yeah.
Some people aren't too loving.
Some people aren't too loving. Yeah, absolutely. You know, Jesus chose to love everybody. Does that mean it was easy on him either? No, but that was his Father's command.
But it wouldn't have been an easy time right now
No.
for them to love.
Yeah. That's kind of where I was going next. So there's Linda doing some foreshadowing there. Because Jesus knows what's going to happen to him. So if you knew what people were about to do to you, think about it. They were going to lie about it. They were going to mock him, beat him, whip him, crucify him. And what is he saying to do with people like that? Love them. Now we can say that out loud, but how hard is it to do in the moment? Holy moly. I've been there. I think we've all been there. When you read this verse and you put it in context like that, you realize, wow, this is a tough commandment. Something only God has ever always done. The next verse, which is a very famous verse that people often quote when it comes to people serving in the military and things like that. So does somebody want to read verse 13?
No one than this, that one lay down his life for his friends.
Okay.
Okay, so these love in the Greek is this. Which love is this?
This is agape,
Agape.
the unconditional love. And really, it has to be unconditional because if somebody's your enemy and they're beating on you, do you have any reason whatsoever to love them? No. So you're doing it without condition. That's the idea.
Because if it was the philo, is that one of them?
Philo.
Then that would be a conditional one.
Philo or phileo, however you want to say it.
Phileo.
Yep. Yeah, that's the brotherly love.
Okay.
Yep. And you might say, well, you know, I have unconditional love for my family. Yes. But there are some things that break families apart. There are some things that, you know, some people just can't get past. And so that's why we have a separate word for that. So phileo, you can call it brotherly love, familial love, friendship love, that kind of thing. But agape is unconditional.
You think a lot of it is because they're not in church, they're, you know, they don't.
Well, not being in church,
Learn, you
Yeah.
know,
not being in church certainly doesn't help.
No.
But unfortunately, even sometimes, and I don't want to look at anybody when I'm saying this, okay? But sometimes you can also have unloving people in the church,
Sure.
you know? And that's unfortunate because that's the last place, you know, that should be happening. But it is what happens. Absolutely. In fact, we were reading, you know, if you remember the sermon this past week from Ephesians 4, you know, he was talking about being patient and tolerance and doing it for the sake of unity, you know, basically being willing to put up with one another. Because the more people you get in a small space, what happens? Inevitably, there's going
More
to be
aggravation.
yeah, more aggravation you're going to have. I think it was funny you guys were talking about having your own room earlier, you know, when you were kids or not having it. And I had my own room as a kid, and it was like my sanctuary. And so that really meant a lot to me. That's why when I built the addition for my kids, I wanted them to have their own rooms. That's something I always had. And that's something I really enjoyed. And I think that can, you know, there's advantages to putting kids in one room, like the socialization and watching out for each other and maybe even holding each other accountable. But the upside to having your own room is there's probably a little bit less conflict. You're not in each other's business all the time.
You're not
trying
putting a line down the middle?
Yeah, there's not a shared space. You know what I mean? So there's ups and downs to every arrangement. But I had that privilege, and I was very grateful for it. Well, there's lots of other things to talk about when it comes to this verse. The idea that there is no greater love than this. So that shows you that there is a hierarchy of love. Now that's a problem when it comes to the English language because we have one word for love. It's ridiculous because English has, on average, 3 times more word than any other language, and we only have one word for love. So it's really bizarre. But we wouldn't say that loving your favorite food is the same thing as loving your son or your daughter or your grandchild. We use the same word, but we mean it in a different hierarchy, don't we?
Right.
You know, one is obviously more important than another. One is obviously going to last longer than the other. One matters, one really doesn't. So to say here that greater love has no one than this, that one laid down his life for his friends, Jesus is, of course, foreshadowing what he's about to do, but also not just foreshadowing it, but calling his disciples and us his friends. Now, it's really something for God to call us a friend. I mean, that's almost like us calling an ant a friend. You know, that's how much smaller and weaker and less intelligent we are than God. And yet, what does he do? Comes down to our level in the form of Jesus Christ and calls us friends. And it's not the only place he does this. That's really something. And did Jesus die for the whole world?
For sure.
Yeah. So who does he want to have as his friend? Everyone. Now, can you think of somebody that you'd rather not be friends with? It's a pretty easy question, isn't it? We don't want to name names. But yeah, there's always somebody out there where you're like, oh, I can't believe that's, that person's in my family, or that person's in my business, or that person's in my church. There's somebody somewhere that irritates all of us. I was in the bank yesterday, just in line. There was a bunch of people in line. I'm not sure why it was so busy. But there was this guy at the last counter talking to the clerk really loudly. Really loudly. And he wasn't doing it because he couldn't hear. He was angry because of something he had just watched on the news, and he wanted to tell somebody. And it was politics. Everybody in the room was immediately annoyed by not only his volume, but his subject matter. And the place was busy, and the lines were long. And we don't care about your politics when we just want to get our banking done.
Right.
Right? And yet Jesus died for him. Jesus wants him to figure it out and be a friend. I'll tell you, I was as annoyed as anyone else in that moment. Because we're all thinking in that same moment, shut up so we can get the line moving.
Yeah.
And that the teller was annoyed. Even if you agree with everything he was saying, that's not the point. We're not there for that purpose.
I can't believe that.
What if I got upstairs and did a whole sermon on nothing but what computer you should buy? It might be true, okay? I might be speaking truth. I might be an expert in that area, all that stuff. But is it the place for that? No.
Might make an interesting invitation at the end.
Of using Apple products. Come on down.
Some people could be your friend after you slap them upside the head with a 2x4.
Yeah, especially men. Yeah. So, and then of course we can put this in context of people who do put themselves in harm's way for our sake. I read a bumper sticker the other day. I wasn't exactly sure how I felt about the wording, but it was true. They said, if you are living in peace, it's because of somebody else being willing to do violence on your behalf.
Is that like going to war?
Yeah.
Wasn't there a poet or a well-known author that had a quote similar to that?
Probably was that quote, and I'm just not getting it exactly right.
And something that you sleep well at night due to rough men willing to commit violence or something like that.
Yeah, on your behalf. Yeah. When my dad was in the military in the 70s, he said the toughest, roughest, gruffest men he ever met were the paratroopers. And he didn't go to Vietnam, but he was on his way when the war ended, so that was super fortunate. So you might say he went, but he didn't actually get there. But the paratroopers, because he said, they didn't know from day to day if they were going to live to see tomorrow. They had no fear. There was no point in having any fear. They didn't know where they were going to go, what they were going to have to do. And it's because of people like that we enjoy a lot of freedom and a lot of peace.
That was true of most of the services, or the Army ones, and the tunnels and things that the Viet Cong was in. And
Right. Yeah. And I've never served, so I don't know what that's like.
It was horrible.
Yeah.
We had a friend in it, and my ex didn't go over. He was on base, but they taught him how to fly, so he didn't ever go over it. But we had a couple of, and it was bad.
Yeah. And it changes you forever. That's one thing I've learned is men who've been through war, they're never the same.
Well, and that's the thing, especially with Vietnam, was that, a lot of not only what they went over there and went through for us, they came back and lived with the rest of their life.
Yep.
One of my cousins, he had problems with alcoholism and drugs and everything, and when he died, I was talking to his wife, and she said, well, he's not in pain anymore, and Vietnam's finally over.
Right. Yeah. 30, 40, 50 years later. Yeah. There's plenty of people today still suffering from what they dealt with over there.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
I had a neighbor when I was a kid, back in Vietnam, I was older, I mean, I wasn't a little kid, but, he went to war. People lived behind us or some went to war, and he never come back, we never knew what happened,
Right, missing. Yeah.
you know. They got a body back, but they didn't think it was him.
Yeah, that's just it. Sometimes they don't know.
No,
Yeah.
sad.
Yep. So you might say Jesus was one of the original examples here. Greater love has no one than this, that one lay down his life for his friends. Well, any other thoughts on this verse? It's one of those verses you could talk about forever. I thank Virgil again for getting my glasses back. I can read and not be in pain.
We're glad you got it back.
Glad you didn't mow
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what.
They were next to the fence, you said, right?
Right in
No?
the middle of the gate.
Middle of the gate. So they could have been ran over.
Oh,
I
yeah.
was lucky they weren't. Wow.
They were out where you could really walk on.
Oh, good. Good. I guess I should be fortunate. It was raining Sunday morning and therefore nobody
Was
stepped
out
on
there.
them. Yeah, the kids weren't out there playing. So, yeah. I really took my time weed eating that because it's kind of a pain with the fence and everything.
That's
A lot of
how
grass on them. I don't know how they got all the grass on them.
Well, I weed eated to death, so I don't know.
kind of like my hearing aid. I lost it. I hunted and hunted for it. Couldn't find it. I decided, Lord, I'm not worrying about it anymore. If I find it, I find it. If I don't, I don't. So I was out by the walkout hoeing some weeds. Walkout basement. And I was chopping weeds and I looked down and I thought, that's my hearing aid? I thought, no. Lost the other one, yeah. Dropped it. I was shocked. I've got so I do that if I keep worrying about it.
Yeah.
You know, if I just leave it up to God and say, I'm not gonna worry about it anymore,
Right. Right.
I'll find it.
Yep. I understand. All right. Now, the next verse, kind of intense. Somebody want to read verse
First
14?
might give you an out. You can be my friend if I command you to shut up.
All right, verse 14, somebody.
You are my friends if you do what I command you.
Okay. So when we say Jesus is our friend, is he a friend like we're friends? No, that's not the same thing. Right. Because even though he is our friend, he's also what? Yeah. He's in charge. Right. You've probably all heard of the hat system. You know, depending on where you are, you might put on a different hat. You know? And that's useful. That's good to know. And that's something I actually teach a lot of young adults is depending on what situation you're in, you might wear a different hat. In some situations, you might be in charge. In other situations, you're not. Nobody's in charge everywhere. This is a rule that Luke is still learning.
Yeah, we used to wear different color bump hats.
Okay, so that's where that came from. Okay. And so when he says, you are my friends if you do what I command you, there are times where our prayer life and our working with the Lord is more on a cooperative basis. You know, we're doing something with him. He's doing something with us. There's other times, though, where he's the commander in the field and we're the subordinates. And we're doing exactly what he says when he says to do it. And maybe a good way of thinking about that is, again, going back to war. If you're in war, if you're in the battlefield, do you have time to argue or to talk to your commander about something at length? No.
You aren't gonna be allowed to in most of the cases anyway.
Well, and even if you try to, you're going to get shot or get somebody else shot. You know, in those situations, it's pedal to the metal, do what I say, that's the end of the matter. But does God allow us, when time allows, to ask questions?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. You know, so there's a time when you can wear that hat, and there's a time when you don't. You know, that's something, again, I try to teach all my kids this, but now I'm working on Luke with this. You know, not every situation's the same. For example, when we were roofing, he had two buddies with him, And I told the two buddies, Luke's in charge of your little group. And the reason why is because he's done this before and he knows what he's doing. And then the very next thing I said to Luke was, I said, be nice. Because when you put a little 12-year-old chihuahua in charge of people, they might get a little what?
Bossy.
Bossy. Yeah. Now, you can be in charge without being bossy, right? Yeah. And in fact, one of the wisest things I ever learned as a preacher is that churches are volunteer armies. Good luck telling other people what to do. Why? Because they're volunteers. They can walk away anytime. So even though you're in charge, you better treat them as equals, and you better be respectful, and you better ask and not command, because that will not work. And he was very wise. He had a nearly 35-year ministry in the same church. And I think it's because nobody ever saw him putting himself on a pedestal. He was just one of the people. And there's even times in Jesus' ministry where he's very much one of the people. And then other times where he really takes the lead. There's times where he's serving, and there's times where he's being worshipped.
But it's hard when you're dealing with people and you're dealing with something that you understand and know how to do. It's hard not to sort of, you think you're helping, but you sort of take over without realizing it a lot of times.
Yeah.
I'm bad at that, I know.
Yeah. Oh.
He said amen.
My dad used to say that God put men in charge so we'd have something to do. Because, because here's the truth. Women have influence over men. Men don't have any influence over women. So if we weren't in charge, there wouldn't be any balance of power at all. You know what I mean? And something else I learned about being in charge a long time ago is that if you're doing it right, it's a pain in the butt. If you're doing authority right, you're treating it as responsibility, not as a power play. Otherwise, you see the whole thing resting on your shoulders, and you're taking responsibility for everything that happens, including everybody under you and what they're doing. And if that's the view you have, you're going to be an effective leader, and you're also going to kind of hate it because it'll drive you nuts. So real leadership is 99% responsibility and 0.1% authority, and nobody knows what happened to the rest. So, and I can tell you too, even when I was in business and I had employees, could I just go around and bark at them all day long? No, that doesn't work. So even if you're paying people, there still has to be a degree of respect, and there has to be an understanding of things, And so Jesus has a lot to teach us about authority and leadership. All right. Any other thoughts on verse 14 before we move on? Thoughts, questions, comments? We haven't had a good rabbit trail yet today. We haven't met in 2 weeks. Anybody saved any up? Not yet?
Not yet.
Got 'em. That's been 2 weeks.
Very good. Verse 15, somebody would please.
No longer do I call you slaves, for the slave does not know what his master is doing. But I have called you friends, for all things that I have heard from my Father I have made known to you.
Okay. Now when he says the slave does not know what his master is doing, what do you think that means? Like, what would the slave not know that a friend would? Kind of a
Well,
deep-
they don't treat them like master don't treat them like a friend.
Right. Yeah.
They just boss them around.
Yep. True.
And they aren't gonna tell them a lot of things
Yeah, right.
unless it's necessary to get the job done, but a lot of things you're not gonna,
Yeah. They're not going to share a lot of private
Yeah.
information.
a lot of things is necessary to have to know it, or give them a burden that they should have no reason to have to worry about.
That makes
Right.
sense.
Right. Yep. Connie, I felt like you had something to say there.
I think maybe I did, but it went somewhere.
It went on somewhere else. I think it's over there. Okay. All
Okay.
right. Yeah.
I have one thought, but I don't think it really fits this application. The master has very little accountability to the slave.
Yep.
but he has some to his friend.
Yep.
But I don't think that fits this, does it?
Not like when it comes to God, he's not accountable to us,
Right.
of course. But, he says in John, the author here, when he writes 1 John in chapter 4 and 5, it talks about how we become sons and daughters of the kingdom. A son or daughter is closer than a friend, and a friend is closer than an employee, and an employee is closer than a slave.
Right.
So you see how there's levels of involvement? I mean, he puts us up there in the family. He calls us a son or a daughter of the kingdom of God. So, when we are called friends and we are called sons and daughters of the king, then he is letting us know what family should know. And that's going to be a whole lot more than what an employee or a slave or even a friend would know. For example, your closest friends probably don't know your social security number. Oh, that's great. Karen, daytimers would not be the same without you. I have Karen quotables going back 12 years now. So, I love that. All right.
I keep it interesting.
You can't ever quit daytimers. It's just not allowed. No, it's not allowed. Yeah. But that's just an example, and it's not that you don't trust your friend, but have you ever had a reason to give it to him? No, so you wouldn't. But a family member might know it because they might need to handle your estate when you die, or they need to do something for you in the event you're incapacitated. So you can see how there's levels, here of friendship and love. And Jesus puts us in the family.
I'm not sure Dee even knows my phone number. There's, the phone numbers are saved now in her name. So.
I used to know everybody I knew, and now I don't know any of them, except my own. And sometimes I don't know that.
There's no need to.
Yeah.
Yeah. I bought. Okay, so here. I'm gonna introduce a rabbit trail. This is a new thing.
Oh, God.
Yeah, I know, right? A couple of years ago, I bought a new atlas. A book of maps, because I know technology well enough to know you shouldn't depend on it entirely. And I thought I don't have any paper maps, so I just bought a big old atlas and got a bunch of paper maps, because I thought, what happens the day it comes when either the internet is not available or not accessible or GPS doesn't work or whatever, maybe there's some kind of World War III going on, I might want to know where things are and how to get there. And so the reason why I bring that up is because along the same lines, I'm going to see if I can put this in the way that I want to put it. I think sometimes people get so locked in to their routine of church and ministry that two things can happen. We can develop tunnel vision, where we think that that's the only thing that matters, or two, we forget to acknowledge what everybody else does. And I've learned as a minister, when I was much younger in ministry and I was much younger being a minister, I used to not see the background task as important as they are. But the truth is, without the background task, the foreground people wouldn't have anything to do. If it wasn't,
Or the means to do it.
yeah,
Possibly.
yeah, all the people that do things in the background, thanklessly, are the ones that enable all of us in the foreground to get anything done. And so I can't look at the world through only an electronic map. I can't look at the church only through what I do. I have to have an appreciation, like God does, for everything. And that's something that He teaches us, is to be grateful. Because every little thing that every little person does makes a huge difference in the end. You've probably noticed, last week wasn't true, but recently we've had pretty high attendance, and we've almost run out of communion cups a few times.
Oh, really? I could understand that.
Yeah. So imagine if the person who put it together didn't think about that our crowds have been getting higher. That would make communion time kind of chaotic, wouldn't it? But they've been filling the trays to the max, anticipating more people. And then you have a Sunday like last Sunday where attendance was relatively low, and a person who's not thinking ahead might think, well, I don't need to fill them up to the max anymore, but what's going to happen?
And then that's, yeah.
They're going to all be back. So they got to think about that. And that's just a little thing that an individual person did that enabled the service to go smoothly. And I don't even know who did it. I'm just really grateful they did. It's really something to think about. All right. So he's told us, it says here, for all the things I have heard from my Father, I have made known to you. And so when we're in the family of God, we are privy to what the whole purpose of all this is. If we were just a slave, he says here, I no longer call you slaves. If we were just slaves, he might tell us, I need you to go preach the gospel. But he wouldn't tell us why. He wouldn't tell us what the point is. He wouldn't even tell us if we were included in salvation. But because we're in the family, we know why we should preach the gospel. We know why it matters. We know that everybody's invited. Everybody's included if they want to be. And that God doesn't discriminate whatsoever. So we know the whole business of God, which is saving and redeeming lives. And he's chosen to involve us in that business. So it's a very different relationship than being a slave. It's even a different and better relationship than being a member of the nation of Israel in the Old Testament, because they didn't know all this stuff. They knew to look forward to the Messiah, but they didn't know him. They had to obey all these rules. They had to follow all these laws, and yet they weren't even saved by all that rule keeping and law following. In fact, the rules, basically, what they gave you was the ability to live in the nation peacefully. That was really what the rules gave you. But to be saved, you had to look forward to the Messiah to come. So we have it better than even the citizens of the nation of Israel in the Old Testament. So it doesn't get any better than that.
I've got a question.
Okay.
All those people that lived under the rules that died, were they saved?
What verse were we talking about?
Rules.
Oh, died under the rules. Yeah, Hebrews chapter 11 tells us at the end of that chapter that those who were anticipating Christ coming will be saved just like we are.
Okay.
Yeah. So the Old Testament people who were faithful to God are saved by Christ just like we are. The difference is when they died, there was an IOU for their sin, and Christ paid that. In our case, Christ had already paid for it.
Okay.
And that's what the purpose of the Old Testament sacrifices were, was to delay the payment of that IOU until it was time. The sacrifices, as it says, delayed the punishment of sin, but it did not pay for it. In fact, it's bizarre to me that any Old Testament Jew could whatsoever argue that salvation is even part of the religion, because it isn't. There's no promise of salvation in the Old Testament from the law. No. Like I just said, the rules were so you could live in the nation of Israel peacefully, so you could be a part of the Messiah coming. But you were looking forward to the Messiah coming. That is what saved you in the Old Testament. Jesus saves, old or new. There's no promise in the Old Testament for salvation.
So then people obeyed the rules out of fear of being cast out of that?
Yes.
So,
In fact, if you read any of the law breaking that happens in the Old Testament, what happens?
stoning.
They get stoned or they get exiled. So the rule keeping and the laws were there. There was two purposes. One, to keep the nation of Israel functioning. And two, to anticipate the Messiah coming. Because it kept the lineage of Christ pure. Because God had given prophecies that Jesus would come from the line of Judah, for example. And that he'd be descended from certain people like Abraham, for example. And so on and so forth. If you had introduced foreign nations into Israel and intermarried, then those things wouldn't have come true. So in order to give us a clear and straight line to who Jesus was, he created all these laws so nobody else would want to live like the Jews. Who here would volunteer to live in a country where you couldn't eat bacon? You had to wear clothing woven of two. You could not wear clothing woven of two types of cloth. and 600 other rules. The only reason why you would join that nation is because you believed in what it was going to produce down the line. Nobody would volunteer for that system thinking they'd benefit from the system directly. So that was the point. In fact, there's no promise of heaven in the Old Testament. You realize that? No promise of an afterlife. Even Orthodox Jews to this day admit that.
Right.
That's why Moses said at the end of Deuteronomy, look for the one like me to come. And the prophets would keep pointing towards Messiah to come. It was a constant push towards Jesus because they knew salvation would come from him. It would not come from the law. Nobody was ever saved by the law. That's the book of Romans. That's essentially the argument of the book of Romans. You can't be saved by the law.
So where did the Pharisees and the Sadducees come up with the idea of whether or not there was a resurrection? If there's...
Well, the Sadducees were essentially the liberals of their day. So,
And they said no.
yeah,
right?
they did not believe in a resurrection. They were essentially religious atheists.
Because if there's no promise of heaven,
None.
then the promise would simply be being resurrected back to life on earth.
No, the Sadducees did not believe in an
Right, but the
afterlife.
Pharisees did.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
The Pharisees being the lawyers,
No, that was the
scribes.
scribes. The Pharisees were a religious order established between the time the Old Testament ended in Malachi, about 400 BC, until the time of Christ, about 100 years after that. And the purpose of the Pharisees was to prevent the people of Israel from going back into idolatry that got them sent into captivity to begin with. And they actually fulfilled that job. The Pharisees did their job because Israel never fell back into idolatry when they came back from Babylon for the last time. But instead of just being a police force against idolatry, they ended up becoming a moral police force about everything. And isn't that usually what happens with bureaucracies? It starts out small with a single good intent, and then before you know it, it's this massive, nasty, crazy pit.
I wonder what we have now.
Well, and a good question to ask is, why don't the Jews have Pharisees now? Well, because they themselves admit it was a failed experiment.
So if the Sadducees did not believe in the resurrection, what did they think of?
Nothing. They think you just died. They believed in annihilation.
So what was the purpose of their faith, what was it looking to, their belief?
There's two answers to that, and this is going to sound crazy to you, but some of them believed that the purpose of living a holy life on earth was so that your life on earth could be as good as possible. And then the second one is, some of them believed in hell, but not heaven.
Really?
So the only two possibilities you had was going to hell or ceasing to exist.
That's weird.
Wasn't much of a choice.
Nope. But again, you don't get this from the Bible. You don't get this from the Old Testament. You get this from Jewish philosophy. And about 150 BC to 100 BC, in that range, after the Pharisees have been around for a couple hundred years, they had written their own commentaries. And a lot of the Pharisees' ideas and rules came from other Pharisees, not the Bible. That's why when you get to Jesus' time, Jesus is constantly contesting their rules. He's not fighting the law. He's fighting their traditions. Like, do you remember that time where they were washing and Jesus says, you wash the cup, but the inside of you is dead as dead men's bones. Otherwise, you're obsessed with all your rules and traditions, but you don't care about the heart. So, that's what had happened, is that they had become kind of inbred in their theology. And I meet people like this to this day. I mean, you probably know somebody who makes up their own rules, somebody who drives themselves crazy by their own crazy dictations. It's just a human thing to do. It's just certain personality types that will drive themselves and everybody around them crazy.
I know with some people, germs, they just have to
That's a good example.
clean everything,
Yeah.
It just drives them crazy.
Right. And they,
How did our family,
and they enforce it on other people. That's where it goes too far. If you want to be an absolute total, another one is diet. You know, some people are like, you can't eat sugar, you can't eat, like I don't eat sugar and I don't eat gluten. Do I go around telling anybody else they have to do that? No, I have to do that. I wish I didn't, but I have to. But if I went around and telling everybody, you can't have sugar in this church, that's wrong. That's Pharisaical.
We rebel.
Right. And rightfully so. But some people do that with other things. They'll claim that something is Christian and it has to be this way. A good example of this is some, not all, but some Amish communities have extremely strict dress codes, and they actually believe that if you don't keep those dress codes, you will go to hell. Well, where is that in the Bible? You see my point? That's being Pharisaical.
That's one person over all of them is dictating their life.
Right. And it's often used as a means of control.
Right.
Yeah. Their way or the highway kind of thinking. Yeah. Kind of off that verse there a little bit. Welcome to Daytimers. We're kind of at a good stopping point, so I think because the next verse gets pretty deep too, so we'll stop there. All right. That always goes by really fast. At least always feels like it to me. All right. Thoughts, questions, comments before we close? No? All right. Well, Virgil, would you close us out?
Our gracious Heavenly Father, we're thankful to be here today. We're thankful for your word. We're thankful for what you do for us. And Father, we just depart this place. Use us. Amen.
Amen. All right.